for Artists. Danceful is an international choreographic centre based in Nottingham, and we are part of presenting a work at Sacred Festival, which is happening at Chelsea Theatre, a work by Chris Dugrenier on Tuesday the 25th of November, and as part of that she is an evening of a double bill with Sylvia Rimat, and welcome both of you to this chat. I think what would be great is if we start a bit to introduce your work and your practice to each other, and then we'll take forward some of the themes and commonalities between this double bill. So thank you both for taking part.
Welcome. Hello, Sylvia.
Hello.
So I'm Chris. We've never met, I think. So
no.
It's I've seen one of your work before, so it's nice to be able to have this conversation. And
right.
So yes, we'll be having that double bill. So I'll probably see you live in body on the 25th of November. And I was interested in watching some of the video to find the point where actually our work meets. And I think the piece I'm presenting, World's Last Caprice, is about memory, really, succinctly. It's about memory. And I'm approaching this through different ways, using list, aide-mémoire, and making a catalogue of all our belongings, and kind of through that approaching what is attached to those objects, and then leading to talking about legacy and inheritance. And so I'm interested in your piece to do with decision making and memory, maybe also, and I kind of wanted to find maybe the different type of memories that the two works can deal with.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll introduce myself. My name is Sylvia Rimat. I'm a performance artist based in Bristol. I'm originally from Germany, and my work focuses on processes of the mind in the widest sense. I'm really interested in consciousness. So yeah, I did a performance project with the title, I Guess If the Stage Exploded, where I was trying to create a show no one in the audience would ever forget by working with memory exercises. Mm-hmm. And I had conversations with different specialists about that. So I spoke with a neuroscientist and with a psychologist who advised me what I could do for my performance to be remembered, for instance. But the show I will be presenting as part of Sacred in a double bill with you, Chris, is called If You Decide to Stay, and it is drawing on decision making. So I'm celebrating the choice of each individual audience member to have come along to see the show. Some of them may have made that decision very actively, others may have been dragged along, but still they did come along. And and for this show again, I worked with a lot of specialists in the early development process of the show. So I was wondering, so I was working, for instance, with 2 neuroscientists and with a mathematician in computational science, but I also embarked on some psychotherapy sessions to find out about my very personal ways of making decisions. And I had a session with an astrologist to find out about the decisions I might make in the future. So I was wondering, do you how do you develop your performances, and or what? Because you say you are interested in memory, which I think there is a very clear connection to my work. So how would you go about developing your work?
I think in my case, every work is quite different, and memory and seems to be maybe a running theme, but in the piece, I'm really dealing with it. And memory, aide-mémoire, mnemotic tools. You just mentioned something that actually made me think about also another element, which is planning ahead, the future. So in your case, you approach the, how the decision making of your future.
Yeah.
And I think the commonality with the piece that I present as part of Sacred is actually making plan for a future where I am not there.
Yeah.
What happened in that place where you make your last decision on a piece of paper, and it has a weight. It is quite a potent document.
Yeah, that sounds impressive.
When you start making that process, I kind of have a conversation with solicitors, and then also with people who had made the document, the last will and testament.
Yeah.
That process also, when you make it for the first time, it's quite a weighted document, a weighted process. And I think the process I embarked was even more weighted, because in order to do that, I decided to catalog every single object that I have. So I made a list on paper, on a Word Excel document, but I also realized that's not working for me, so I made a photographic catalog. And so, yes, the process was an interesting one as well, to kind of decide, in the future, when I'm not there, what are those things? What are the value? What is attached to them? And then also deal with the fact that, what if you have nothing left?
Yeah, of course,
So,
yeah.
but I was interested in this planning ahead and making plan for a future.
Okay.
Knowing at the same time, how is that going to be realized?
That sounds also really fascinating, because I'm currently working on a new project called This Moment Now, which is dealing with how we experience time. So, because, I think temporality or time is really closely related to, of course, memories or decision making, which often has to do with or links up the past with the future.
Yeah.
It's fascinating, yeah.
Mm. Yeah.
So
No, go on.
So for my performance, if you decide to stay, I tried to find out also what happens in our mind when we make decisions, what happens with the neurons in our brains, or how do we make decisions, really, which is crazy thinking about it, because it's so complex. So in my show, I work a lot with like an image of the field, but also an image of the stars above us, because of the complexity of how we make decisions, but how everything is, the neurons in our brains, how everything is combined and connected, really.
Yes. Yeah. And do you make the parallel with how we are also connected to the world outside? So, you point out the connection within ourselves and brain connections. And then do you expand that further to, how you might be connected with members in the audience, or are you making connection from there on with the audience? Is that connection carry on as well?
Yeah, so I make also connections with my audience. Obviously, if I wouldn't have decided to become a performance artist, that's something I point out, they wouldn't be there at that point in time to see my performance, and so my decisions in some ways have affected their decisions. Of course, that is only a very small decision in that moment, but because I chose the image of the stars and the field, so like you say, I'm really interested in the connectivity in the macro and the micro inside our brain, but also actually when you think about and look outside into the universe. And I actually do ask a kind of a similar question in my show, like because I asked the audience at some point what decision what they would decide to do if they were told, like, the world was to end 2 days in the future, if we had only 2 days left, like what would we do? Would we, for instance, if you were to run out with your toothpaste, would you bother buying another toothpaste, or would you decide not to sleep for the next until the world is going down, or would you decide to try to document the end with your iPhone camera and all these things? What would we decide to do, knowing it's going to end?
Yeah. And I think that's an interesting place, that place where it ends. And in my case, in a way, it doesn't end. It continues in a way, through legacy, through trust, through condition people have left in the document, and through the object that are inherited. Yeah. I'm dealing with the fact that maybe there isn't, and I think I'm dealing also with the role of the artist and the kind of, I don't know, the idea of the immortality achieved through a means of artistic œuvre d'art. So there's all those interesting thoughts through those connections.
I find it also really interesting how looking into families, how we remember, and that it's often like over 3 generations. So I still know of my grandparents because I've met them, but I also know a bit about my great-grandparents, even though I've never met them, but because my parents told me about them. So, and it feels that's kind of how far it goes, and then it stops, because to hear about the great-grandparents there is no connection anymore. Yeah.
There's no, but is there no connection? Maybe is there any object, for example, of your past family? Is there any object that you will associate with the person from your past generations?
That's interesting. We haven't got one of those. Have you got objects that are handed over in your family?
No, and I'm dealing with that. The fact actually that maybe for a lot of our generation, that hasn't happened, maybe because object doesn't last so long, or in the past you passed the bedroom, you passed the linen, you passed the pans, and nowadays, well, everybody wants their own objects.
Yeah.
But I know people have passed, œuvre d'art, sculpture, paintings, or books or letters. Letters are interesting.
That's true,
yeah. So it's interesting for me with this work to kind of, because I don't have anything that's been left over or passed on, what is it that I'm going to pass on?
Yeah,
me
really.
As a person, but me also as the artist. What is it that continues when I finish the performance?
For my performance, I guess if the stage exploded, that was drawing on memory. I had also a conversation with a researcher from the Center for Death and Dying at University of Bath about talking about the desire in many of us to be commemorated. And he was talking about like how long people want to be remembered, or like when they are being put into a cemetery, and have a gravestone, how long, and often it's about still being present with I don't know, children or grandchildren, but that's about it. And on the other hand, it's interesting because if you look into, of course, people like Shakespeare, etc., have survived, but is it we don't know them I mean, of course, we know that they're great artwork, but we don't know the person, really.
But actually, you mentioned something interesting also with the fact that, the grave is a place of remembering, and especially with what happens today, yesterday, and the centenary of all those things, it's quite, the memorial is quite a potent thing. To be touched also, to kind of keep the line to the past and think also with the future. Those places allow constant shift to the past and also looking ahead to avoid repeating those things. But I was interested in the solidity of that, and actually also with the thought that a lot of people decide to be cremated. The decision in the future where you're not present is involved also. And when you cremate, So
does your work also draw on funeral practices? What decisions people make, how they want to be, how they want? No.
It's really from my autobiography,
Yeah.
as a way to, as an invitation for people to think about it.
Yeah, yeah.
Rather than looking it for how people have done it in the past. But I've done research about all those notions and notions about how also the life expectancy changed. There's all this interesting, the fact that we have another lifetime ahead compared to a century ago.
Yeah.
Of life. Yeah. So there's all those interesting things. So, but it's really, I'm starting from the personal, the autobiography, but only for me as a mirror for the audience to consider it themselves.
Yeah, great. Yeah. So another thing I want to add to that, with my show This Moment Now that I'm working on now, I find it just so fascinating that thinking about identity or how we perceive being in this world, how the moment now that we perceive in like now, it's just so short, and everything in the past that we create, like that makes up our identity, is basically memory, and everything in the future is imagination and relates how we imagine or plan things to be, and that relates again back to our memory. So thinking about this little bit that is just here in this moment now, that is just so small, it's just a crazy thought somehow, quite unsettling.
Yeah, there's an interesting thing about this notion of the memory. I did. I'm currently in residency at the Pavilion Dance Southwest, and I did a little durational task for 5 hours, going around the room doing one simple task, and then just recording when the idea came in my head, just recording that. What was very interesting is actually I pressed pause every time I stopped having an idea and carried on with the task. And when I was playing it back, my memory of the experience was the gap between the thoughts, the long 20 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour. But when I was playing it back, of course, I did not record the gap.
Yeah.
So I just had a thought after a thought after a thought. And that was an interesting thing, that memory does that. Memory just condenses time and remove all the gaps.
Yeah, that's really interesting, yeah. So, do you want to talk a bit about your movement work, how you choreograph your work?
I work with found choreography predominantly. So and every work is very different. So the found choreography is mainly for me represented through video. So I've got one piece of work which I filmed the practice that an aerobatic pilot does before flying his sequence in the air, and the French pilot called this la danse. And it's a vital daily practice.
That sounds amazing.
Yes, it's very, very fascinating, and you also see really the difference in the people who are very experienced at it.
I can't
do it nearly mentally.
Sorry, the last 2 minutes I couldn't hear.
Hello?
Like maybe 1 minute. It was stuck. The video. Can you still hear me?
Time has been erased.
Yeah.
I can hear you, yes.
The video has done what we were talking about.
Yeah. So what about you? How do you approach choreography?
Well, I wouldn't say I work on choreography. Well, even so, sometimes I work with dance as well.
Yes.
I work a lot with a spoken word, with video. There are often animals in my show, sometimes real, sometimes imagined ones. Yeah, it depends really. It comes up from the theme or the exploration or inquiry that will involve again the movement or
Yeah.
kind of yeah.
And actually, that's interesting because you were saying precisely that you're interested in the processes of the mind, but a lot of that has the way I speak, I use a lot of my body. So a lot of the processes of the mind are embodied and find a let out through the word, but also an accompaniment within the body. And I think those kind of gesture for me is the choreography a lot of the time. Mm-hmm. That kind of thing that organically comes out in an association with the other elements.
Yeah. That sounds amazing, yeah.
I think.
Right.
Great.
So I think it'd be fantastic. We can carry on the conversation on the 25th of November.
Sorry?
You can, and I was just. You can carry on talking on the 25th of November, and also through and through both your performances. So I suppose the sales pitch is to say that you're both on at Chelsea Theatre on the 25th of November as part of Sacred Festival, and you can buy tickets from Chelsea Theatre. I think what you've talked about has been so fascinating, just to give an insight into practices and the memory and where those connections. It was interesting listening to you both that I wear my grandmother's ring, and you talked about those objects that get passed from family. Yeah, and I was sitting here and thinking that's something I wear since she passed away. So, but I think you're right. Some of that is a generation thing. But I will be at Chelsea, so very much looking forward to meeting you, Sylvia, in person, and Chris, seeing you again and seeing both your work. Thank you for being part of this hangout. And I'll see you both.
So, thank you. And see you on the 25th.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you.
See you on
Bye.
the 25th.